There's just something so unsettling about what Pandora said from this latest episode of ReZero. She's like, okay, that's fine, it's beautiful. You don't want to break your promise with your mother. 4 minutes later, she is responsible for Fortuna's death, talks to Emilia and is like, hey, your mother's now dead, so you don't need to worry about the promise no more. And it's just like, that logic, that entire conversation is outright scary, because it just shows how spiteful and benevolent at the same time Pandora can be. Like, she showed both sides. Like, she gave off this air of, like, she can be a kind person, potentially, because of how she was interacting with Emilia towards the beginning. But then when Emilia denied her completely, she became so spiteful. It really is fitting of what her title is, of vanity. It's fantastic, honestly, and I think many that have, just now been fully introduced to Pandora these past few episodes are going to be like, man, what a fantastic antagonist of the story, because it really opens your eyes up to potentially everything that's been going on behind the scenes since the story really began. But before I go any further, can we talk about how it exists? The opening. It exists. The opening legitimately exists. It happened. At long last, 6 episodes in to ReZero Season 2 Part 2, we actually have an opening song. And it's a good opening song. There's a lot to really analyze and talk about. And sadly, I can't go full into it because of spoiler reasons, obviously. And I'm gonna just be straight up. It's a very spoiler-heavy opening song. Like, I believe at this point in time, many have probably analyzed and looked at it if you like it, and be like, man, there is a lot of things that kind of spoils. And I don't want to necessarily go into every little detail that it kind of shows, because obviously, spoilers. If you're one of those that have been trying to actively avoid the opening song, you're just listening to it but actively avoiding the visuals of it, then I understand. I don't want to talk about that here. I'll probably save it later on in this video. I'll talk about it towards the end of it. But for now, I'm just gonna say, visually speaking, I like what the opening song represents, and that is something I can talk about. The opening visuals at the beginning, which isn't a spoiler, shows basically all the events that's kind of happened since Part 2 of Season 2 began. You see, Emilia's kiss in the forefront as soon as the opening song starts. You see the crystal, the necklace on Emilia break that Puck was housed in. You see the other little moments of, Garfield, trying to stand in, Subaru's way. You see, Otto and all that just standing up to Subaru and trying to make him realize that I'm your friend. And you have the, the bet between Rosewall and Subaru. There's a lot of imagery in the beginning part of the song that shows everything that's happened since the beginning of this, second half of the season. And some might be quick to say it's kind of lazy. They're reusing animation, but even if that might be slightly the case, there is actually a lot of meaning to what that means, actually, and I kind of want to explain. You see, the whole beginning part of this second half has been Subaru and Rosewall having a bet. Subaru's like, I am not going to use Return by Death. I'm not going to rely on it. I am going to try to do every loop at the best possible without having to rely on Death itself to be able to do it and love myself, etc. And he's putting everything he can into this overall ordeal/bet with Rosewall. And so having those opening visuals pop up with everything that's happened so far in this loop without a death is actually really, it like nods to the determination of Subaru and everyone else within this loop. That is the big point of it. I really appreciate that little detail, and I also appreciate the door scene. Can't go too deep into that one because I'll save that for later in the video, but I also love the usage of the door again, which I talked about in the previous opening song, Realize, for ReZero. So just visually speaking, I think it does get the message across of what, they're trying to say with the opening song. But okay, let's get into the other stuff. So, Pandora, Emilia, Fortuna, and Juice turning into Sloth. There's a lot to really just unbox with this episode, and I think many kind of going into this episode and finishing this episode is going to look at Juice, or Sloth, in a very different light. I think people already were, thanks to the previous 2 episodes, But after this episode, it's gonna make everything hit very differently if you ever go back to watch season 1 of ReZero. I know for a fact myself, I never could see the, season 1 of ReZero ever again the same way after I read Arc 4. I remember when I read Arc 4 and I saw the details of what Juice's backstory was, I was just like, holy crap, all of this makes so much more sense now. The stuff he did to Subaru, how he's like, oh, you're not really mad, you're a faker and all that when he was talking to Subaru, and he was a literal madman, self-reflecting, he was crazy. And then, he also, the situation when he kills Rem and he twists her like into a twister mat, and you just see the situation where he's like, you killed her, Subaru, you killed her. Go back to episode 15 and see what I'm talking about. There's a lot of scenes that add so much more meaning now, thanks to this latest episode, and what he said to Subaru, what Emilia did towards him, what, Sloth did towards Emilia. There's so many things now that you can look at that's going to open your eyes up and feel like, man, I already liked this character. I already liked him as an antagonist for season 1, but now seeing his character, he truly is a tragic antagonist of ReZero, and he really had something very unfortunate happen to him thanks to the manipulation of Pandora. So that is what I need to get right into. So, at the end of everything, the Emilia stuff, when, she realized, her mother figure, Fortuna, was dying, we know what Sloth did, or before he became Sloth, he is responsible for Fortuna's death, and he didn't, want to do that. It was an accident thanks to Pandora's meddling and making him see things that wasn't actually there, manipulating with his overall mind, and when he feels and he sees that he is responsible for Fortuna, he starts to break down, he starts to utter the very words, and you hear his voice start to shift into what Sloth's voice was in season 1, as he breaks down and he keeps saying, what's this, why, or he starts saying love, love, love. He just keeps repeating these words over and over, and they're very iconic words he said constantly in season 1 of ReZero, and once again, it's gonna make that first season really hit differently when you just see the ramifications of just what this episode caused. And as he's breaking down, Pandora goes up real close, does some ASMR type stuff like Satula was doing, and it's like, your love was not wrong. And this entire thing about that, it really just shows how evil Pandora can be, how much of a manipulator she is, by just walking up to Juice in his time of need. He's just down and out, and she manipulates him and just like, oh, you're not wrong and all that. And we see kind of a, zoom out of their conversation, and she starts to say something to him towards the end, and we actually don't get to see what she says to him whatsoever. We don't hear the audio at all. So we know she said something to him, and it caused him to get up and leave Emilia behind in her state of being frozen completely, Fortuna's body on the ground, the entire forest, and everything we know of Juice/Sloth up to that point. He wouldn't have done that. He definitely would not have left Emilia behind like that, the forest behind, left, Fortuna behind. So it's clear, even if we didn't get to hear it ourselves, what was being said, that Pandora did something to Sloth, changed his memories, meddled with something to where he no longer had really any attachment maybe to Fortuna or Emilia, and you could kind of maybe assume in your own way that maybe the direction of his love and how he was projecting it onto Satula in season 1 might have actually been Fortuna. Think about that. Because if you remember, continuously throughout season 1, he was all about Satula. And that's what gives everybody the impression, he's worshiping Satula, he wants to bring her back, etc. And you even see when he gets to actually meet Satula, when he, possesses Subaru, he gets very happy. He's like, oh, thank you, and all that. And then, he gets denied. And when he starts to talk about, oh, even if you don't remember everything, I still love you, I care about you, you've done a lot for me. And this kind of holds a lot more meaning now. You could assume maybe what he actually wanted, or what he was going after to find, was Fortuna the entire time. So most likely Pandora manipulated his memories to actually, potentially think that Satula was Fortuna, or, Fortuna was Satula. You get my point. So it's kind of messed up, honestly, and it just goes to show you once again that Sloth wasn't necessarily a bad guy. He was just twisted into what he was, and in the end result, he suffered for 100 years until eventually he came to a brick wall that was Subaru. So yeah, it really adds a lot of perspective on the character, and there is something I do want to talk about. There is something that is definitely quite different from the web novel to this episode. Now, as I've always explained, the web novel is extremely different than the light novel. You have the web novel, which is this giant, it's like a draft, honestly. Someone said it on the stream I was on the other day. I think Sun said it. But basically, a web novel is like this giant draft. And then the light novel is a condensed version of that said draft into a more refined form. And then the anime adapts the content from the light novel. So there is a lot of content that is in the web novel that is not actually in the light novel. So technically, you can't consider completely everything in the web novel canon anymore. So I don't know necessarily what I'm going to say is actually still canon or not, because I haven't actually read the light novel equivalent. However, the conversation between Pandora and Sloth, when we saw that zoom out and we don't know what was actually being said, there was dialogue in the web novel that actually said what was going on there. It actually just straight up tells you what she was saying to him and what was really happening there. And I'm not going to say exactly just in case, this is something that was, added in the light novel later on or something, or it was removed purposely because maybe it gave too much of the plot away. I have no idea. All I'm trying to say, though, is that there is a big difference between what happened in the web novel to the anime. It's not bad. I think the message still gets across perfectly on what happened there. We know that Pandora did something to Sloth. We don't necessarily need to know what she said to him to kind of get a grasp on what actually happened. But I just wanted to state that in case anyone was curious. So anyways, let's actually talk about the promise. So, Emilia, she has always been attached to promises. This is something that has been embedded with her character since the very beginning of ReZero. Ever since we were introduced to Emilia as a character, we have found out how much attachment she has to promises. And one of the big reasons to why there was such a falling out between Subaru and Emilia in Season 1 was thanks to Subaru breaking promises around episode 13 and onward. And when you actually see this episode and this arc that we are kind of into right now, you now understand why she gets so upset with promises and when they're broken. Thanks to her promise that she made with Fortuna, her mother figure, is technically the end result of why the village froze over, why her mother died, why Sloth became Sloth, etc. And it kind of is very twisted. She kept that promise, and she feels proud that she kept that promise in the end result of her trial. But the point, though, is that she believes in those promises very deeply. It's very intertwined with her very essence as a person, her soul, basically. And Subaru to trample upon that and break promises is something that really hurts her. And it's interesting to finally understand Emilia's perspective, especially after these episodes. I think it's going to make everybody understand now why she acts the way she does, because of just how intertwined it is to so many bad things that happened to her when she was a kid. But, just take a step further as well. When it comes to promises, we gotta think about the key that we saw in Emilia's hand. Now, obviously, there could be some theory crafts about this. You could assume that maybe the key that Emilia saw in her hand might have been, Pandora's doing. For instance, maybe Pandora was manipulating Emilia to where she saw a key in her hand to be able to walk up the sill and do something. But judging by how Pandora was acting, and judging by just the whole events that happened within the episode, most likely the key is indeed real. The question, though, is why is Emilia the only one that can see this key? Why can't someone that's obviously so strong like Pandora that can manipulate reality itself, why can she not manipulate Emilia to such a degree to just grab that key from her? Why can she not do that? There is a lot of questions, and it kind of shows that there is a limitation to Pandora. See, when you see her character, especially in these episodes, it's clear that she's powerful. I mean, she turned Greed into like a mole, like just shoved him into the ground and he wasn't able to do anything. And we saw Greed just being overwhelmingly powerful, and she also just came back from death itself, and it was definitely very different than Subaru's, return by death. She was literally, she died, but she was back again, and she kept doing it over and over, so we know for a fact that she is able to deny her very own death. The question is how far does her ability really go? She's able to obviously change memories, make people forget about things like what she did to Emilia, but she wasn't able to force Emilia to open that seal with the key, which means that there is definitely restrictions to her ability. She isn't, let's say, all-powerful. There is things that she actually cannot do with it, and in this case, the only thing that she can do to Emilia is by actually forcing her to make that decision on her own without any external manipulation. I find that interesting. It's a really interesting showcase that there is some form of weakness, even if we don't fully understand it. There is a weakness to Pandora. And the other question is, if there really is a weakness to Pandora, what kind of limitations does she have? Now, this is me personally theory crafting, so don't worry, this isn't a spoiler. It makes you wonder if she is able to kind of stop her own very death. Like, she is literally able to deny her own death, okay? Can she do that for others? Theoretically, could she be like, okay, Fortuna is not dead no more? Could she bring back Fortuna? See, that's the question. Is there a limitation there, or does her power only affect herself? Is she only able to deny death on her own being, or can she do that for others as well? See, that is a question that comes into play. So, theoretically, if Emilia didn't do her little breakdown moment, and she wasn't, basically telling, Pandora to die, would have Pandora potentially brought Fortuna back and tried over again? See, it does make you wonder, is Pandora capable of that, or is she not? Regardless, though, there is a lot of questions that come about when it comes to this seal and this key and everything around Pandora. It makes you wonder, and I think everybody probably watching this arc is going to come to a very similar conclusion, that maybe that door has something to do with Sloth. I know for a fact that's definitely what people potentially are thinking, because, we know that Sloth is sealed. We know this. We know she's sealed, she isn't dead. Obviously, her literally being around Subaru is obvious evidence. But the point, though, is that we know she is sealed. And the question is that doorway her seal, or something else? Something that we are completely unaware of and have no idea. See, that's a thing. For all we know, maybe that doorway is a seal to the other world, Subaru's world. Who really knows? That's the point I'm trying to make. We don't really know. It's a very vague element to the story. But once again, it makes you assume it might be Sloth, but it could be something else. Because when we think about the forest, everything around that door, it was kind of frozen. There was ice everywhere and snow everywhere. And when we think about Sloth, I don't think anyone really thinks about snow and ice. Obviously, we think of Puck, or we think of Emilia when it comes to something like that. So, is it really Sloth? That's the question. So, another thing to really talk about is Emilia and just the pendant in her hair, the little hair clip. I think this one is really going to blow people away, and seeing it visually for myself really shocked me, because that's actually a little detail I kind of slightly forgot about, because it's been a long time since I've read this, but seeing Emilia grab the pendant off of Fortuna and then put it into her hair, it's like, this makes so much sense now. She carries that pendant with her at all times, like that hair clip, and we always see it in her hair at all times. And now to know the significance of that it is literally of Fortuna, it's literally a piece of her own mother figure, it's like, whoa, she carries that with her to this very point. And when she puts it on, you just see her look over at Pandora and just tells her to die repeatedly over and over again. It shows the extent of how strong Emilia is, like how scary strong she is, and you don't underestimate her by any means. It's horrifying, honestly. And I do think that this is a interesting showcase that Emilia isn't a pushover, and she's a, really strong individual, but, if you push her, she'll get like that. So, yeah, I think that that's going to be a scene that's going to hit people. Besides all of that, I guess I want to talk about the stuff at the end with Otto, Garfield, and Subaru, and them kind of marching over to Rosewall's little shack, talking to him and all that. And we get to see a brief little scene where Ram decides to stay behind. She goes and deals with Ruzu and lets the boys go and talk with Rosewall. And this seems like a very insignificant scene when you think about it, like when that happened and why they got Ram away. But to kind of explain this and give more depth to it, the reason why it was important for Ram not to be there is because we already visually saw what would happen if Ram was there. Rosewall would use Ram as a way to get to Garfield and kill him. So, obviously, Subaru wanted to avoid that potential outcome. He did not want Ram to be there and add a potential liability for Garfield. Because Garfield's incredibly powerful, but the thing is he can only protect so much and do so much. And if, Rosewall uses Ram as a shield, there's nothing Garfield can do. So that is the major point there, is that Ram not being there shows that she was cooperating with Subaru in her own way. She wasn't fully following Rosewall, and that they would not be hindered by any potential hostage situation. Another thing to look at too, though, is how Rosewall's very, board, his chessboard, is falling apart. And, Subaru makes this very clear to him. He's like, you didn't even know that this man existed. Otto, how he was actually there the entire time. Rosewall's like, I don't even know who you are. Who are you? And, he introduces himself. And it basically shows that because of Otto's overall insignificance, how little he was, it has put a wrench, completely destroyed Rosewall's plan. It is undoing everything that he set up for a very long time. It's like a butterfly effect in its own way, thanks to Subaru's continuous redos and loops. And that's the point here, is that it took something so small, so insignificant, potentially, to change the tide of everything, and that's what's happening here. I find it really cool. It shows you just how important Otto is as a character, and that if it wasn't for him, things wouldn't be happening right now. He really did put everything into place. Like, he really, thanks to his introduction of him even popping up in Sanctuary and helping out Subaru, was such a major event that really just changed the tide of everything. That is just literally how important his character really is at this point. Without him, Subaru would not be here right now. Garfield would not have, become an ally, etc. There's just so much to really consider. But, yeah, I think overall that this is a fantastic episode of ReZero, and so I'm now going to talk about the opening song a little bit more in depth. So if you do not want to be spoiled on the opening, like, what's in the opening, I do recommend you to stop watching here. So if you do leave, I wish you a very fantastic day or night wherever you live. Be safe out there, and I'll see you next week for the next, episode review of ReZero. But anyways, now that I've given enough of a disclaimer, a warning, let's get into that opening song before I wrap up this video. So, in the opening song, we get to see quite a few things. We get to see Beatrice and Subaru and how Beatrice is reaching for Subaru's hand. We see fire around Subaru. We see Garfield confronting Elsa. There's a lot. There's quite a bit in the opening song it visually shows. And I'm not going to, kind of explain it, like, because obviously I know what it means, but seeing those characters together kind of makes you wonder, okay, something's gonna happen with Beatrice and Subaru, because you even see in the opening song that they fall out of the sky towards the tomb. We see her fall with Subaru, and it's like, okay, are they going to confront the rabbits? And then you also see Elsa and Garfield, and you're like, wait a minute, Garfield actually left Sanctuary, and he is facing Elsa in the mansion, and that's like something I think Minnie's going to be caught by. They're like, wait a minute, you're telling me I'm going to actually get to see a fight of Garfield versus Elsa? Like, that's kind of a hype fight. So there's a lot to really look at, and then you got the fire, Subaru walking through fire and all that, which is kind of like forged by fire, thanks to everything going on. He's literally been forged by the fire around him, all this hell and all that, since technically he has been walking through hell. And then the final scene, which is my personal favorite with how it syncs up with the music, where Emilia loves herself and you just see her smile, and then you see Subaru bowing, kneeling down kind of like a knight towards Emilia while everybody watches in the background. It's a really good scene. It's probably my favorite scene of the opening song. It kind of represents, you know, what Subaru is. He is a self-proclaimed knight to Emilia, and him kneeling like that's basically saying, I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you made it to the next day. It's a really happy and uplifting opening song. It really is. Like, the opening song is very uplifting. It is a completely different tone in comparison to Realize. Like, Realize was a desperate struggle, while when you look at this opening, it's more of a happy conclusion. Everybody has managed to reach this point thanks to loving themselves and coming together to overcome the impossible. That's kind of what the opening represents. There's also a little bit more visual representations with the opening when it comes to the eyes. You get to see the exotic eyes of Emilia seeing Subaru, Subaru seeing Emilia. You see, you know, the situation of Beatrice looking at Subaru's back and entering through a doorway, which is a callback to Realize. Now Subaru's going down the hallway and all that and mad dashing towards the light. I love these little scenes. It really gives a lot more symbolic feeling to what's happening within the story. And now it makes so much more sense why they decided to kind of delay the opening song for so long and waited this long to actually show it, because all the content within the opening is heavy spoilers. Like, imagine if we would have gotten this opening on the first episode of the second half of Season 2. It would have spoiled the Kiss scene, it would have spoiled the Garfield scene, it would have spoiled a lot of the Pandora stuff and, you know, Emilia stuff. You know, it would have spoiled quite a bit. So, it is a good thing that they chose to delay the opening song. The question now I have, though, is the visuals going to change within it? Because it's possible. It's very possible, because of how they actually showed the opening, that they might have some form of visual change as it continues on and add more scenes to it as more conclusions to this loop continue to pop up. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, you know, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And if you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, please click the bell icon down below. And with that, Chibi out.